I chose this piece, I'll probably talk about it a little bit later on, but this is a piece where I learned that there is a name for sleep talking. There's an official scientific name, which is the somniloquy. So any of you who do your sleep talking at night, you're creating beautiful little works of art called somniloquies. And a friend of mine who's a composer, wrote a collection of somniloquies. What's that? Oh. Okay. Wow. Am I a professional? I'm such a professional. A friend of mine wrote a collection of somniloquies where I sing and play. These bring down the house whenever I play them for grade 2 kids or at bars. And I hope you will enjoy this tiny little 2-minute movement, which is called Pink Gum.
Shoes. Someone said, and just to focus on keeping my focus rhymes, focus like ready to focus. Pink. I don't know. Something like that. Something. I'm gonna pinch you in the face.
Series sponsored and invented by our wonderful Deputy Director of Research, Dr. Professor Bridie Bartley, titled How to Actually Make It, Portfolio Careers and the New Workforce. My name is Dr. Tolmie, and I will introduce the panel. Please reserve your applause for the end, but we have Tim Munro, who you've just heard. He's a 3-time Grammy Award-winning flautist, currently Artistic Director of the Southern Cross Soloists. I've got that right. Fantastic, doing well. Jacqui Somerville is award-winning producer, writer, actor and educator, and she, who amongst a plethora of infamous work, produced and acted in productions with the Royal Shakespeare Company. I only pulled that one thing out of the many that she's done. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sam Vallen. He is lead guitarist and musical director of the progressive metal band Caligula's Force that internationally tours, in addition to around Australia. Please make me feel welcome. So before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we gather, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and recognise that this place has always been a place of knowledge, teaching and learning through music. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we're going to start off with what I call a passion starter, and it's a one-word answer or under 25 words if you can't do one. To ask you individually, we'll start with Sam, what do you love about your art form?
Freedom.
Awesome. Tim.
I think mine is heart.
Fantastic. Jacqui.
Storytelling.
Awesome. That sounds like a really good motto for life. Fantastic. All right. We're going to get into the questions now. So we'll start with Jacqui. And everyone will be answering this question. So what did making it mean for you when you were starting out, and how has this changed for graduates today?
I think I was very lucky in terms of my education. I had some amazing mentors who always said to me, you know, do what you want to do. And I knew that I wanted to act, but I equally knew that I also wanted to direct, and I also knew I wanted to write, and I also knew I wanted to produce. So I had all of these strands that I wanted to pull together. I think in many ways I can see why I've ended up in education, because I can share knowledge in all those areas. But I think at the end of the day, making it to me was possibly, when I first started out, you know, being a successful actor and being able to make money from that, and having the idea that what that meant was getting into a West End show, being in a top movie, and then obviously things changed as it went through. And then I realised that actually it's more about having a fabulous portfolio, as you would call it now, but in many ways it's sort of kind of a constellation of practices, I like to call it, so that you can focus on many things. And that's what I think, you know, I see my success as being here at the con, having a blank sheet of paper to write a course on acting that can sit globally in the world as you know, forward thinking, and as being a hugely successful thing to achieve. But within that, I realise my remit is to help other people realise their dreams or aspirations, but with a tinge of understanding the reality of the life that they're going to go into. So, and to have a clearer understanding than I did when I first started. Because the dream is one thing, but the reality is the other.
Yeah, brilliant.
I ask myself that question to this day, every week, every month, every year. It's something that has in some ways plagued and also inspired aspects of my career. When I was a teenager, all I did, I just wanted to be in the in the room where music was made. And then once you step into an institution, then it was, oh, there are these lists of things that I have to hit. I can tick this box and this box and this box and this box, and that will mean that I'll have made it. And I was very plagued by that for about the following 15 years. And it's only been in the last 10 years that I've started to really come back to like, oh my God, making it means using the skills that I have to communicate to other people. But I do go back and forth because I still feel this like status anxiety around making it. That making it is playing at QPAC or on the Sydney Festival or in New York. But that's ultimately, as someone who has like stood on big stages, it makes it better for a moment. It makes a certain thing better for a moment, but like those have sometimes been some of the crappiest experiences I've had. And like being in a room with people, making things together, that is making it. It's just like how do you do that and make a living? And that is always the sort of ongoing conversation that I have sort of internally.
I'm noticing already that the one words that you gave underpinned the values that you have, that also underpinned your progression. So Jacqui, it was all about the story and the storytelling, and she's saying now she wants to help others with their story and their career. And you kept touching your heart and saying, this is where I'm returning to. Sam?
So I'm sort of, a child of the early 2000s, born in the late 80s, envisioning a career at a time when the music industry is still very commerce-based, but yet when we sort of saw the changing tide, saw like Napster coming towards the end of high school for me and so forth. So my vision of what a music career would be was something that constantly was challenged throughout my early sort of formative years building that career. And I guess the question was partially based around like what's changed for students nowadays. When I started kind of building what became my band, a lot of the platform that I've kind of built my career on, it was enough to use something like Facebook as a promotional mechanism to kind of help. Whereas nowadays I spend time with students who are absolutely paralyzed by the fact that they have to create a certain amount of content to tick a certain amount of boxes and, keep the momentum rolling. It's such a nebulous concept in its own right. I feel like that's the thing that's changed. I guess I've had this perspective of being both slightly before that framework, building a lot of what I've done within that framework, and now sort of seeing the catastrophe it's become. And I don't say that in a particularly gloomy way, because I think the solution is actually pretty obvious, which is those who are building careers right now, we really shouldn't be accepting that premise, right? Music, writing, songwriting, composition, it shouldn't be something that's based around 10-second hooks on TikTok or whatever. So I guess that's like how I come around about the response here of like, how is it different? You guys are faced with that, but we're in an interesting, it's a little intersection where we can sort of make a decision as to whether we all fully commit to that and it continues to get worse. Very different answer to the others, but it's been on my mind a lot lately.
I completely agree. A lot of that was, I came confronted with that when a lot of my development as a musician didn't have social media in supporting or interfering. And I would sort of say that a lot of emerging musicians have to be highly aware of that, and not just the content they produce, but the stuff that's actually captured about them. And I recall even I was performing in Tina Turner the musical and classic sort of 80s music, the saxophonist has to get up on stage and do raging solos and all that kind of thing. And the Tina on stage at the end would encourage the audience to get up your phone and start filming, and that's when I've got to do a 32-bar raging solo in that, and it gave an extra level to the performance anxiety that anyone would experience, but not knowing where that was going to be placed afterwards. Yeah, it was really interesting. And so I just thought, gee, the younger people have a different dimension to navigate than probably what I did when I was their age and just starting out. So it was really imperative that I was beyond prepared and mentally and physically as well.
So one thing that I have noticed, it's the thing that I've seen for a lot of students who sort of build their career, around whatever mentorship can be on the way. There's a pretty stark divide between those who are putting all of their sort of emphasis on creating social media profiles and developing careers in that space, and those who can actually sort of sell tickets as well. So one thing that is the same that I took really seriously throughout my early development, which is to say like getting on the road, self-funding tours, letting those get bigger, eventually getting to the point where you can sort of do that profitably, do that on your own terms. I actually don't believe that's changed that much. I actually still think that's one of the most important outlets that we have as musicians. We're going to talk, no doubt, a lot about entrepreneurship today, because I think that's going to be a through line for talking about, the sort of portfolio career model. But a big part of it is remembering that the virtual reality doesn't necessarily equate to bums on seats. And those who are spending a huge amount of time, or maybe all of their time, building that right now, there are other things out there that are just as relevant as they were 10 years ago, 30 years ago. As a quick thought, following up on yours, Diana.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. I should start with Tim. This is a nice segue question. Most artists will say that artistic excellence is not even half of it. What skills do we need in our toolkit in order to do that thing that we love and want to do for as long as we can?
I always want to be clear that I'm only answering for myself in these sort of situations, because it is very different now and there are a lot of different sort of overlapping challenges. For me, it was just understanding that I had a drive to communicate and that could take many, many forms, and not to downplay some of those forms, where at the time it might have felt like I was a second-class citizen if I was writing program notes or doing pre-concert talks or teaching at high schools. that was all for me part and parcel of who I was as an artist. And so for me it was, and it took me a long time to accept this, but that all of those things, I mean, producing concerts, curating, I did some broadcasting work that turned into professional work, all of these little things that actually, I started off by doing them because I wasn't getting playing work that I wanted. It turned into arms of my professional portfolio career that were earning me like a reasonable overall salary. That it was like understanding that there was a core thing to me, but that these were all sort of offshoots. And it took me a long time to accept that that was a valid way to be a professional in the world.
So the theme I'm hearing there is acceptance of the situation, being flexible with the situation, maintaining your curiosity, and that will lead to more passionate work that perhaps you understood existed or even just never did and became something that, could sustain you in many different ways.
Every minute that I've been in love with music, it has, like, going back to the heart thing, it's all about this sort of instinctual reaction, and then all of that work, I felt connected to that. And so for me, it was just like, what are the ranges of work that I can do where I feel connected to who I am as a musician? And there were many, and that was the connection, yeah.
Yeah, I set a theatre company up with a group of people when I was a unit finished, and we ran that for 2.5 years, and I realised that I was not doing all the work. I realised, there we go. And so I suppose, a bit like Tim, I can only talk from my perspective, but I just realised that I was diversifying my work. So I had, at one point, the work that I did with the RSC, even though I'm going there as assistant director and players cast. I then went back and worked with them in the education department because I thought that would be a really good way to do it. And that was at one point, that was like my mainstay of my employment during the year. But I also worked with theatre companies and who were doing, I did a master's in dramaturgy, so I worked on that, so I would help develop scripts with the War Court or with the Bush, with Soho Theatre. So I had this other dramaturg strand. I also wrote plays, and I was commissioned to write 2 things, so in 1 year. So I was always doing lots of different things. It was almost like that I was always needing to do something. And I was a freelancer for many, many years. And my accountant would help me work out my finances, and I'd have about 6 different strands. But I would sometimes earn more money than some of my friends who actually had full-time jobs. So I was actually really pleased that it took a lot of effort. And I got to the point where I was a bit exhausted by doing that. I remember, you're always like Tarzan in the jungle. You've got one hand on one, you're trying to find the next job or the next contact. And I was a brilliant networker, and I don't mind anything because I didn't mind talking to anyone, regardless of whether they were making the tea or whether they were the artistic director of the theatre. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, because I'd find out things, I'd find out what was happening, opportunities, and I'd always go to first nights of shows, so I'd meet people there, and then I'd meet people who could give me jobs, and I got a lot of my work actually sitting and having drinks in a few bars. But it's sort of, I think, I'm not sure if that's answered your question completely, but I think there's, there's always been integrity about the work, and I think there are some negative sides to some things in our professions, but I think it's about trying to keep positive and knowing that it's a numbers game. You're either not contacting enough people or you're not meeting the right people, and it's about trying to find out who those people are that you need to communicate with, who are the gatekeepers.
Fantastic. Because I sort of see that as far as packing into the toolkit great skills of networking, which fundamentally is communication, excellent listening, and also from what you described, I really love the analogy of the Tarzan, where I was always just use the spinning plates and keeping the plates actually spinning the entire time.
but I like guitar, that's more visual as far as I'm concerned. But also managing one's time. I would imagine learning when to say no is equal parts as when to say yes to something and understanding what opportunity is.
I agree, and I think a couple of jobs that I've done or experiences I've had have come on the back of saying no to something. And I think sometimes success comes from saying no to certain jobs rather than saying yes, and I think it's being brave enough to be able to do that. And I think, as Shakespeare says to Hamlet, let discretion be thy tutor. You have to make your own decisions about that. But equally find mentors, people who you can go, do you think this is the right idea? I'm thinking about doing this. And that will really help you solidify, what decision you make. I mean, there was one point I thought I'd be a musician. I wrote songs. I actually cut a record, a little tiny 45 RPM. And, but I thought, anyway, I won't go to Hawaii. It's somebody's dream, and I'm not going to. But it wasn't for me, let's say. So I love music. I love listening to it. And it's great being in this place where I can see it happening so beautifully.
I'm very lucky to have that as well. So, how would you like to respond?
Yes, so the idea of being exceptional, not being, the half of it, I think you can frame this aspiration, and I think it's a really important thing to have as sort of an aspirational guide, which is this idea that, your craft, whatever it is that you're kind of putting out into the world, the assumption should be that is, at some point in the developmental journey, world class. That shouldn't just be taken for granted. I think what I learned with that as my focus in the early days was that there are so many auxiliary roles that make that true. So one for me, talking about sort of mid-2000s, building the very early parts of my career, was coming across production basically as a skill that I didn't have any initial interest in as a kind of expertise, something that was a necessary job that just needed to be done for me to be able to sort of enter the musical sphere, start to build my career. And it's become since a portion of my portfolio career, but the idea there is to say the job needed to be done. I was ready to be I was willing to take it on and try to turn it into an expertise. I think given that nowadays more than ever, these music careers that we build are incredibly diverse, incredibly sort of multi-skill oriented. If you're someone who is not comfortable just trying your hand at something and being that thing, being your own manager, as I refer to some of my students, being your own booking agent, being your own producer if need be, and taking part in all of those roles, you're definitely missing out on, first of all, a situation that makes certain things that might not otherwise be possible, right? A lot of those things can be cost prohibitive or can be limiting in some other way. So I guess the key to put out there within that stream and ramble of ideas is that it's probably better to do something than not have that thing done. And I think for those of you who are forging early careers, if you don't have certain roles occupied by collaborators you can work with, friends or finances that you can cover, try your hand at them, even if it's only temporary. I think one of the worst things that I commonly see, and I commonly talk to people about, is people who have a fear of kind of putting things out there because they don't think the skills that drive them are necessarily good enough, and they end up paralyzed, stuck in this particular position without the ability to move beyond that position. Maybe it's I need to put some music out so I can get some gigs, I've got that in my press kit, etc., right? I think it's better to just do things, even if they're not perfect, and I think it's better to use those as platforms to build upon. Eventually you'll have collaborators, friends, contacts, resources available to outsource those where need be. But if you're not kind of willing to try your hand at stuff, you're probably going to find that there are more dead ends than there needs to be.
Well, that's great, and also that builds on a really recent research study that we did. Brendan Anthony was leading it, myself, Brett Voss, Henry Jones, and we interviewed a whole bunch of just portfolio career musicians. This was as recent as about a year ago, and one of the things that came up was that they said, we've got all these skills in the performing arts, but what's coming glaringly through is that we need more skills in production. The tech, not just the tech, but just understanding how it works, the workflow, and they did actually find, they said the ignorance was holding them back, but what was coming screaming through, which is what you just advocated, is that they had the bravery to find out how to do it, tinker around, make the mistakes, or outsource. And they'd say, look, I know the thing that I need. It looks like this, and it's black, and it's got some things, and I've got to just shove A to B. Or it was that I'll consult the man in the black t-shirt and hope they're sort of really nice to me. But they were really, and they were all in their own right quite successful with what they did. But what came screamingly through was that they had the courage and the bravery, which is a skill in of itself and something that you have to constantly step out of your comfort zone and do. But our big hairy conclusion was that, it would be great to have more of that in the actual curriculum itself. Not so much the tech, because the tech can be sort of obsolete, but to understand the just underlying basic function and just to instill that bravery.
Just on the bravery point, because every time I did a new thing in the professional world, it was the first time that I did it in the professional world. And there is a leap in that. And, there's all the work that you do here in a variety of ways and out in the world. But that bravery is a little bit the bravery to be like, okay, I guess I'm in this room and I belong. The first time I did a live radio broadcast, the first time I wrote a program note for Carnegie Hall, the first time I stepped on stage, in a variety of all these different aspects. There is a bravery in that is, because sometimes also you're a bit crap at it, even no matter what background you have. I was a bit crap at all of those things the first time. You do have to go through, but you have to just throw yourself into some of those things, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. The part, the end result or the outcome of the bravery to have some kind of function is reflection. So you've now just sort of said to us, well, I did that, and I know it was a bit ordinary, but I've learned enough to do it the next time better, to do it the next time better. So I would say it's one thing to be brave, courageous, but you've got to really look at that experience and go, okay, what did I learn from that? What can I gain from that? Take it to the next bit. What will I do? What will I not do? But I think sometimes gets a little bit lost when, what's that definition of insanity? When you do the same thing over and over again and you expect a different result. So, yeah. So, great. Thank you very much.
I just put that on to that, because I think that, one of the things I talk about in terms of acting is productive discomfort. And it's, you are all going to do something that's going to create discomfort, And then at some point you just have to get through that. And that's a really productive moment, because you've achieved something by pushing through this discomfort moment to produce something that's quite powerful. You may have learned that, that didn't work, it was shit, but then you can move beyond that. But I think we all need to have a week where we do something that has that sense of productive discomfort, because it makes you not necessarily a better person, but I just think that it just expands your knowledge, your remit,
you also learn. You learn about yourself. Oh, maybe this isn't for me, I guess.
That means singing.
Another recent study that I did on the transferable skills of musicians in non-music workplaces. And they were professional and equal, but just very high level in both. And I had one high-level optometrist, and she's like the chair of Optometry Australia. And she said, what are the main things with being a singer-songwriter, musician that's performed and toured internationally and repeat albums, etc., is she is comfortable with being discomfortable, if that's a word. So she's comfortable with discomfort, and she also knows that everything's going to be okay. But the next thing that sort of happened as another layer was all her work colleagues saw her as a kind of a rest in understanding that. They just sort of went, yeah, she's the one we're pushing her to do all the PR stuff and get in front of the radio and do all the uncomfortable conversations, but she can see herself as getting through it because she's using another word, war-torn, but happily so. So we're going to go into a little bit more about arts for art's sake versus what I call smart for art's sake. So the question here is, how have you financially and artistically sustained yourself in the past? So how have you financially and artistically sustained yourself in the past? And what do you recommend for current and emerging artists? Jacqui, we'll start with you.
Look, it's interesting when you have to, obviously I'm from the UK, I don't know if you heard that in my accent, but, when I grew up there, we had a completely different system. of finance. And you realise that in order to leave and become your own artist, have your own practice, whatever that might be, you have to have a freelance career. Over here, I think it's an ABN number that you have to have, isn't it? Whereas it's something very different there. So I, and obviously every year you have to go to an account and say, I've earned this amount of money. So it's sort of like, so I got to know spreadsheets very well. So I think there's something really important about being practical as a musician. It's just really, or as an artist or as an actor, is just knowing how you capture that, how you capture the different strands of what you do. Like I said earlier, I was very successful at that. I actually was quite a bit of a nerd really when it came to putting all those numbers in that form and going, ka-ching, yes, I've done really well, but it was never about the money. But, I lived in London. London is a very expensive place to live, and I had to find a way of making my money, so I would work as a bookkeeper, ironically, or as something else. And so diversifying and doing a barista job didn't quite happen there because it wasn't quite around when I was at uni, but I worked in a cafe and I sold tea and did all that other kind of work. But it was interesting when I had an agent that worked for me as an actor, because then they were able to fight for the correct fee for etc. Or I was very noticeable that I could then it could be negotiated, and there was a way of finding a way through that. But I think I've never really worried about money. I've just thought I just need enough to put money on the table. I've never been someone who's wanted lots of money. I don't have that. So I think I'm not the best person to talk to about finance, but I seem to make it. I don't quite know how, but obviously I have an income here, there's nothing more addictive than a regular wage. But I think there's equally, I still have a mentality of a freelancer because I spend the majority of my career as one, and I think sometimes that puts me in really good. I think it's a really great place to be because, as well as working here, I also work as an intimacy coordinator, which is one of those things I just fell into. I do work across film and television, and also theatre independently. And I just think you need to be aware that, is it that you want to earn money? And obviously, if you have a family and you get to a certain point in your life, I don't have a family. I have a partner, but I don't have any children. I think I'm quite selfish, so I think it wouldn't have quite worked. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble here. So, but money is a very interesting thing, though. I think it's sort of when it comes to money, you have to put a price on what you do. I think it's really important to know and ask yourself, why am I a musician, or why am I an actor? Who am I, and why do I do what I do? I think if you can fundamentally answer those questions, somewhere along the line, you need to ask yourself, well, why? What is it? What does that cost? What do I think I'm worth?
Yeah. So the fundamental thing there is knowing your value and understanding the rules and the laws of the arts as well. And it was interesting you touching on the family and freelance life. I mean, Tim and Sammy both have young families. Has there been a time, finance versus artistic, that has been a compromise, Tim?
You're specifically asking about like with a young family?
Yeah, just in general.
Sorry, I'm not holding the bottom. I'm so comfortable holding the bottom of it. I wonder if it's helpful. I might just give like a snapshot. I was thinking about 2019. I mean, of course, this is pre-pandemic, but I thought when you slice a tree and you see the rings. In 2019, I was living in America and I earned about, I think, 55 or 60,000 US dollars that year. And as I look at that, kind of snapshot of what those elements were, there was probably $15,000 of that was exclusively playing the flute. So I had a couple of regular gigs, and then I took a bunch of freelance things that made me some money, but also lost me some money. About $15,000 of it was writing work. Another $10,000 was broadcasting. I got kind of adept at like live radio broadcasts. And then there was another little slice of that was some teaching. And so that's sort of what made up the totality of what I earned, which was, I have always worried about money, always. I don't know what it is, there's some like deep-seated Protestant thing that like gets me. It's the same thing that makes me nervous when I work outside of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday hours, which is hilarious. But I've always worried about money, and so for me, I was always like, how do I get towards enough to live, and how do I sustain that? But as I look at that cross-section, every one of those came from one initial conversation about 5 or 6 years prior, maybe 3 years prior, maybe 10 years prior, and they're all about like unanticipated relationships that led to this moment. This is not what you asked, but I thought since you were talking about like, in some ways, the range of activities, as far as like compromise goes, there's almost nothing in there that were things that I would have done if I were given complete artistic freedom. So there's always compromise. Every one of those in some ways was not exactly what I wanted to be doing, and yet everything's connecting to my own like values.
That sounds amazing. It was good to see your triggerings as well, thank you. And then post-COVID, so we'll just not talk about the dark years, but then post-COVID, has that changed or has it just expanded?
It's a little confusing because I got this job and then I have a salary, so I'm like content and happy wherever all these wonderful students are going into uncertain times. So I was very lucky. The COVID years were very dark years. I mean, there's just that sense that why on earth are people going to want to rejoin us and come back? And that has continued to be a challenge, of course.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Sam, what is yours?
As I was thinking about it, because the framing of like how does it change around a family got me thinking. It wasn't initially where I'd been going with this, but it occurred to me that a lot of my career was really kind of defined partially by those balances that we as a collective chose to make along the way. The earliest parts of my career were very much classic portfolio career. I do a bunch of lifestyle stuff in a corporate setting. That'd be my day job. I do a bunch of teaching. I did some sessional lecturing, slowly moved into that while gigging and touring around that side. But the way I viewed it at the time was that over time, my live touring work would eventually be the greatest degree of income. And the thing is that worked perfectly up until 2019. So I sort of saw my career develop in a way that was kind of surprisingly financially lucrative. If you had asked me in 2017 whether I'd be living purely off of a tour bus and my own original music, I would have said absolutely without any doubt yes. That's what I'd be doing now, probably. But I think I recited this to some of my students recently. So 2019, I got everything close around the pandemic. My band released our biggest album by far, right into the beginning of that. And we already had booked and paid for US tour, 2 European tours, some Japanese dates. We lost tens of thousands of dollars just on the spot when all of that got cancelled. And immediately after, we were sort of met with not only the whole, cool, so we're all broke, but also our identities kind of being taken from us. Like this thing that would really build this, ongoing kind of trajectory that was, at that point, really self-perpetuating. Like we were excited by it, the excitement drove more, that drove more of the excitement, was also the cycle that we were in. So not to dwell on the dark times too much, but basically during that period, I started a family, and throughout the lockdown period, my view towards all that, the balance that I perceived as, right for me, drastically shifted. I mean, you'll remember this, but there were times during the pandemic where we didn't know if there'd ever be gigs again. We didn't know if it would ever really be reasonable for someone to stand body to body in a 500-person club or a small theatre or something, and that be socially okay. We questioned that. So with that in mind, I sort of pushed further into, kind of academia. Not that that was really that different. That was a big part of my life beforehand. I did my doctorate on a tour bus, just for the context of all of that. And post that, we sort of found our way back to it and, made up for a lot of that lost time. But at the same time, it was definitely a crossroads where we went one direction and the other direction would have been drastically different. So the balance we experience now, I say we in the band, me personally, is one that's much more based around if I'm going to disappear for 6 weeks to make however many thousands of dollars, I also don't get to see my 7-year-old son for that period. I don't see my wife for that period. She's got to deal with that. All of those kinds of balances, I'm going to somehow convince this place that it's okay for me to disappear for that amount of time. It's just impossible on its own, right? So it's a different balance now that we experience. We, I, etc. I might leave it at that.
No, that's good. I'm sort of seeing some core values so far from that question from everyone is know your value, read the terrain, look ahead, plan for the what if, send it up, find a balance that suits you, and by the way, you can do your PhD doctorate on the 2 of us. So that's
it's tiring.
It's tiring, but possible. So I guess thinking from that, a question I want to ask is what myths and assumptions exist for those hoping to design one's career in the arts? Perhaps this is just what have you observed, Jacqui?
I remember I made a note of something in this one. I think the thing for me is that if they're sort of pretend that if the idea of if I'm good enough, I'll be discovered. And I think you just need to reframe that so that it's more about opportunity. It's often built through relationships, timing, and initiative. And just to go back to something that Tim said about meeting people, 3 years prior, and then that coming to fruition later. I've had numerous times that's happened, and I've seen it happen with students that I've taught as well over the years. And I just think we just need to be careful what our narrative is as a human. I think we need to have them, but we just need to be careful that we're not in a place either delusional or we're not. I think we all need to have dreams, but I think they need to be sort of based in a sort of a practical framework. I think practice is important, and that we need to treat our own practice like we would protect a relationship. I think it's hugely important, and I think with the words from the Bible, if you build it, they will come. I think there is something about that in terms of if you are working on something, but how you work on it is the most important thing. It's like you don't want to spend too much time on something so that by the time you get to the end, you've missed the opportunity that you could have had with that moment. So I think it's about timing, it's about who you know, it's about, all of those kind of things.
Brilliant, I love that. I somehow was dreaming with your eyes open, but I really love that. It's you're practicing to protect and nurture like you would a relationship. Fabulous. I love it, Tim.
Mine is pretty simple. And it's very specific, I think, to the classical realm more broadly, although perhaps it also affects theatre also. There is no work that is better than other work. There is only work that speaks to your skills and interests and that aligns with your values. And that's absent money and all of those considerations. But basically, the idea that if you're doing casual work in the QSO, it's better than if you are teaching in a high school. If you are enjoying both of that work, then that is the goal. That is all we want, is to find work that is meaningful. And I see that again and again, this striving for particular things that gets in the way and muddies our own ability to learn about ourselves.
So it's almost like comparisons of thief of joy in a way. It's just do your thing, enjoy your thing, keep doing your thing. Sam?
So I've got a slightly different framing of this. I love that, by the way, because I think that isn't necessarily limited to the classical realm. I would say that equally to any of my sort of contemporary people, let's say. But the one that I want to suggest is, it's not so much a myth, I think it's more just a bit of a negative mindset that does appear a lot, especially as artists in that sort of early developmental phase, playing, gigs, developing a persona. which is this really competitive mindset that can suddenly take them, especially when it comes to like, I want that support gig, or I want to, whatever platform they think will lift them next. And artists in that situation can get kind of backstabby and kind of difficult in terms of the community they're building around them. What I want to suggest is the cliche, a rising tide lifts all ships. I think if we are building communities together, that is to say, promoting at venues that a lot of us are playing, attending each other's gigs, making those spaces where people would go more inviting, more communal. What ends up happening is you develop these whole scenes that can emerge out of, just a scant few artists or bands. And you'll notice that that's exactly the thing that results in, shows being better attended and your name therefore growing with them. So that's sort of awfully specific, but it's something that I do run into all the time. Don't be in competition with one another, support one another, cheerlead one another. I think it's really important.
That's so beautiful, and there's a difference in the definitions between envy and jealousy that I feel like I only just learned about recently, and I think it's important here. I have had envy for people in different positions, different opportunities, and that goes on forever. But there's a difference between that, which doesn't seek to take something away from somebody, and jealousy, which is really guided by wanting someone else not to have an opportunity. Feel free to have that envy. I understand it myself so deeply. But don't let it ruin the rising tide.
Definitely. Don't get jealous, get inspired, is what I would always say to my clarinet saxophone students is one-to-one. And the same thing of just attend each other's stuff, because that would happen with even writers. So Trent Dalton, Boy Swallows University, is a journalist and a career male. It was him, Matt Condon, his now wife, and they all supported each other's works. And so now when you read their books, it's always endorsed by, and they're all in different publishers, but nevertheless, they've created each other's success. Jacqui, I'm just going to say that sometimes, on the back of that, it's like, you don't need permission also to be an artist. You just need structures or to build on, and that's really important. And that's freeing, which is Sam's Foundation Freedom, that's awesome. We've got one more question, a lightning round, and maybe 2 minutes of opportunity to answer some questions before the Tower of Power lets rip with a bunch of brass players. How can emerging musicians and actors create opportunities rather than wait for them? And I'm just going to chase this with you because some people find that question of proactivity and doing it all themselves. So this question is, they find that quite daunting. So what would you advise to those who do not have the confidence to create those opportunities? So I'll say the question again. How can emerging musicians and actors create opportunities rather than wait for them? What would you advise to those who do not have the confidence to create those opportunities? Start. Jacqui.
I'd say find fellow, crusaders, whoever, someone to work with so that you can explore and create together. I think there's a lot to be said about working together, and I encourage the actors, and we've had quite a few from our cohorts who have left, who've set up theatre companies together and have done their own individual work. One of them won an Emerging Artist Award with Creative Theatre, which was really exciting a few years back with the Anywhere Theatre. But just having the courage and the curiosity and the collegial kind of energy to go, let's tell stories together, let's work together. And if that's in your cohort, or if that's across in interconnectedness across programs, then that's brilliant,
Yeah, definitely. I think people appreciate and admire the process as equally as the outcome, if not more. When they go, this person gave it a crack, and look what they did, and I help support this. This is really cool. Yeah, we'll come on board. This is pretty exciting. The feel of it is, I think, as great a gift as the asset at the end. Sam?
I don't think it's the right thing to shy away from stuff that you are afraid of, especially if it's something like networking or reaching out to people. I think a better way to frame it, at least in my experience, as someone who is very much an introvert, but yet everything I do every day is with people. So it goes, I suppose. But the idea of sort of creating a series of tangible steps to get to something. So if your goal is to get your music to a bunch of music industry figures, let's just say that in the vaguest sense, and you're terrified of networking, first of all, just stick with your music for a little while. Work out how you can explain it. Like, great, nice little press kit. Like, think about each of these little discrete steps that end up resulting in you making that little reach out. Of course, if you've got collaborators along the way, that's amazing. But I think instead of thinking about it as like, how do you eliminate these scary tasks, it's just make them smaller tasks. Make it so they're not nearly as intimidating. And slowly tick them off, because at some point you're probably going to have to face up to a lot of those things. I don't mean that in an intimidating way. I mean it hopefully in an empowering way. You can definitely do this. You just might have to do it a bit at a time.
Thank you.
I don't have anything to add. Those are essentially the idea of pals, compadres, a community is, I say this as somebody who I'm myself, like, appear to be quite outgoing and bold and things, but actually, like, I'm that little nervy guy. And so, actually, Sam's idea about little tiny steps, I wish I'd known those things. I really tried to step from here to here because I could see here from here, and I was like, well, clearly that's the step. But actually, yeah, the little steps. So I have nothing to add, because I think those are things I wish I'd known as someone felt kind of alone and felt like I had to do that.
Yeah, you can sort of see quite steep before you start to. But it's a great analogy of baby steps, and also just choosing your pace. And every day we learn to walk before we run, so that's always good to know. But I like the idea of fellow crusaders, compadres, and community members. That's kind of nice, the triple C, and the courage to work together. All right, we've got a lightning round. This is going to be a really big one. Starting with Sam, then Tim, then Jacqui. Answering this question very quickly with as least words as possible. Craziest artistic thing you ever did experience that led to something amazing? Go.
God, I didn't know it was going to be an artistic thing. Deciding that I was going to write a 16-minute song vaguely based on a sonata that was going to be a piece of sort of rock music, and it worked out quite nicely. It was just a cool imitation.
Fantastic, Tim.
I flew over to America to go study when I was finishing my degree, and I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever done. And it's a little bit of a testament to good decisions turning to bad decisions, turning to good decisions, turning to bad decisions, because it is the reason that I had the career that I've had. You know, that weird misstep.
That was a courageous big baby step, I guess. Jacqui. There's a director called Vallen, who I really admire. He's supported internationally. I wanted to work with him, and he was looking for an assistant director. And I was doing a show in a theatre which was up the road from where he was, and he contacted the theatre and asked me to go to him, but I still had to do the interview. And at the interview, he said, "What do you think makes a good artistic director, assistant director?" And I just said, "That makes a good cup of tea." And I'm just really proud of the fact that I said that, because I did get the job, and I did work with him, and I just thought, I could have come up with some really sort of deep and profound statement, and then I thought it was really lovely that on the last day, when I was finishing off, we still communicate today, but on that last day he said, "I just need to tell you, Jacqui, I want to give you some feedback. You make a really shit cup of tea." I don't believe it. Brilliant. Well, we have probably upshot of 4 minutes for any last words of wisdom and maybe 1 or 2 questions. Would anyone from the panel like to? We can do questions for 4 minutes straight away. Anyone have any questions? Yes. Danielle.
How did you know that you could think you were right that when that's what you did was still school?
Hello, yes, it's working. I'm assuming yes, but did you have any really profound moments within your career where you were really doubting what you were doing, and how did you either navigate it or take a step in a different direction, or just how did you navigate that in general?
Talking about the dark post-pandemic days yet again, it's hard to help. I remember having this genuine concern towards the end of that period after flying high in the lead up to it that, you know, we would sort of return to attempting to do these things, and we wouldn't, on the one hand, know who we are, but then on the other hand, would people come and care about that kind of thing? That was an example of a situation where I reckon my own artistic identity kind of hung by a thread for a brief period. Really, you know, we needed some kind of affirmation to remind us that the world could become normal again and our careers could continue. So that's definitely one that pops out in my mind.
I'll just say very quickly, I am not sure I've ever had a continuous week where I felt fully confident in what I'm doing, maybe even artistically. But the thing that always brings me back is, oh my God, my love for this art form. Like, it's such a weird thing, maybe like seems highfalutin, but it's just like I listen to something, I go to a concert, I talk to a friend, and I just feel connected again to music. But it's no reason to dance around the fact that we do a thing that's very tied to our sense of identity, and that can have really dark, challenging aspects. It's just like always that love. Oh my God! It's just like I hear a chord, I imagine something that could happen in the world. That's something about the art that like always brings me back.
I think for me it's like with everything, my sort of modus operandi is like kind of feel the fear and do it anyway. And sometimes that's got me into difficult straits, but most of the time I've moved beyond that, and it's, you know, I think imposter syndrome affects us all at certain points in our lives, and I think that I think sometimes I get it on a daily basis. I can go into a class and think, oh my God, do I actually know anything? And it's sort of, what am I teaching? Have I taught them anything? You know, and I think it's actually really healthy. I think it's a healthy thing, or at least I've told myself that it's a healthy thing. But and I think that if you just trust in what you know, and at that point, and think, oh, but there's more I can know. What else can I find out? And then I think if there are those darker days, it's just going out, just sitting somewhere and just looking and breathing and realising this place is a beautiful world to be in, and you know, just see people living their lives, and then just that mindset will just stop, and you can just carry on with what you want to do. And it's just really important to realise you're going to have moments like that. You're going to have dark days, you're going to have moments where, and I think it's like an arrow from a bow. Sometimes you just got to get to that place, and then once you stretch, however hard that moment of stretch, it will fly farther and faster than everything, and you'll just land somewhere else, and you will have experienced that moment.
Brilliant, Jacqui, really inspiring, thank you. So the big takeaway that I'm going to summarise using your core value words is that you have your story, you have the freedom to tell it, follow your heart, look after you and others, and dream with your eyes open. Please thank Tim Munro, and Jacqui Somerville for being on the panel today. For organising all of this today. If you'd like to catch another Big Ideas session, that will be occurring again in the middle of the year. We can't wait, it was amazing. So inspiring today. Thank you very much for attending today, and enjoy your lives as musicians and actors and performing artists. You are special people. Thank you very much.